Welcome back to Silent Conspiracy. Picture this. Down the hill, Dow Hill Girls' Boarding School sleeps behind iron gates. But sleep here is never peaceful. Between them stretches Death Road, a pathway where footsteps follow travelers who walk alone, where headless figures drift between trees, and where the forest itself seems hungry for company. Tonight, the story of India's most haunted educational institutions, where students and teachers have reported supernatural encounters for over a century, and where the boundary between the living and dead has worn dangerously thin. Kurseong sits in the Darjeeling hills like a forgotten jewel, established by British colonizers in the 1880s as a hill station retreat from India's punishing heat. The British built their institutions here with typical colonial confidence: solid stone buildings, manicured grounds, and educational facilities designed to civilize young minds according to Victorian ideals. Victoria Boys High School and Dow Hill Girls Boarding School became prestigious institutions where wealthy families sent their children for proper English education. But the hills of Kurseong hold older secrets than British pedagogy. Local Lapija and Busha tribes speak of these forests as places where spirits gather, where the veil between worlds grows thin in the mountain mist. They tell stories of ancient burial grounds disturbed by construction, of sacred groves violated by roads and buildings, of restless souls seeking justice for disturbances that can never be undone. The British dismissed such superstitions as primitive nonsense right up until their own children began encountering things that Victorian rationalism could unexplain. By the early 1900s, both schools had developed reputations that extended far beyond their academic achievements. Students whispered about dormitories where unexplained sounds kept them awake, classrooms where invisible presences watched lessons unfold, and corridors where the temperature dropped without explanation. Victoria Boys High School, an imposing red brick structure that dominates the hillside, became the epicenter of supernatural activity. Students reported hearing footsteps in empty corridors during night study hours, the sound of children laughing in vacant classrooms, and most disturbing, the appearance of a woman in white who would glide through walls and disappear when approached. Dormitory supervisors documented incidents of beds being disturbed while students slept, personal belongings moving from room to room overnight, and windows that would open and close on their own despite being securely latched. The phenomena intensified during winter months when the school emptied for holidays. Caretakers left to maintain the building reported experiences that drove many to resign. The sound of a full school assembly echoing from empty halls, lights turning on and off in patterns that suggested invisible occupants, and most chilling, the sight of children in school uniforms walking the corridors when no students were present on campus. One particularly well-documented incident occurred in 1967 when a night watchman encountered what he described as a procession of students walking silently through the main corridor at 3 a.m. When he called out to them, they turned in unison, revealing faces that were pale, expressionless, and somehow wrong. He fled the building and refused to return, despite financial hardship. His replacement lasted 3 weeks before reporting similar encounters. Dow Hill Girls Boarding School, located down the hill from Victoria Boys, developed its own catalog of supernatural events. The girls' dormitories became known for what students called the Weeping Woman, a female presence who would sob inconsolably in empty rooms, always just beyond sight but never silent enough to ignore. Students reported being awakened by the sound of someone brushing long hair, the rustle of silk dresses in corridors where no one walked, and the sensation of being watched while studying. The school's library became a particular focal point for paranormal activity. Books would be found rearranged in patterns that spelled out words or names, reading tables, and show signs of recent use, despite being empty when librarians locked up each evening and students frequently reported feeling invisible hands guiding their research towards specific books or topics. Most disturbing were the accounts of students who claimed to attend classes with teachers who shouldn't have been there. Elderly instructors who spoke in accents from decades past, teaching lessons that hadn't been part of the curriculum for generations. These phantom educators would appear normal to the affected students until classmates pointed out that they were responding to empty spaces or copying notes from blackboards that showed no writing. The forest surrounding both schools earned its own reputation as supernatural activity spread beyond the buildings themselves. Death Road, the pathway connecting various points around Kurseong became notorious for encounters that defied explanation. Travelers reported being followed by invisible companions whose footsteps could be heard clearly on the gravel path. Others described meeting fellow walkers who would engage in normal conversation before vanishing mid-sentence, leaving only the echo of their voices and the disturbing realization that the conversation had been one-sided. The most frequently reported phenomenon on Death Road involves headless figures that appear between trees, usually during early morning or late evening hours when mist obscures clear vision. These apparitions seem to move with purpose, following the path or standing motionless among the trees before dissolving into shadow. Witnesses describe feeling an overwhelming sense of dread when encountering these figures, as if their presence signals something fundamentally wrong with the natural order. Local legends offer various explanations for the supernatural activity. Some point to the 1950s murder of a local school headmaster whose body was found on Death Road with his head severed, an act of violence so shocking that it allegedly bound his spirit to the location. Others cite a series of suicides in the 1970s, when several students from both schools took their own lives in the surrounding forest, creating what locals call a cluster of trapped souls. Historical research reveals that the land beneath both schools was indeed used as burial grounds by indigenous tribes before British colonization. Construction crews in the 1880s reportedly found human remains during excavation, but continued building without conducting proper reburials or spiritual ceremonies. Local tribal leaders warned that disturbing the dead without proper rituals would anger the spirits, but British administrators dismissed such concerns as superstition. Modern paranormal investigators have attempted to study the Dow Hill phenomenon using contemporary equipment and methods. Teams have recorded unexplained electromagnetic fluctuations throughout both schools, temperature anomalies that follow no logical pattern, and audio recordings that capture voices speaking in multiple languages, including English, Hindi, Nepali, and what linguists identify as archaic Lapia dialects. Digital photography at the sites frequently produces anomalous results. Figures appearing in images that were uninvisible during shooting orbs of light that move in geometric patterns, and most intriguingly, photographs that seem to show the buildings as they appeared in different historical periods, complete with period-appropriate furnishings and decorations that haven't existed for decades. The most compelling evidence comes from multiple independent witnesses reporting identical phenomena. Students from different decades, visiting researchers, local residents, and school staff have described the same apparitions, the same sounds, and the same locations where supernatural activity concentrates. This consistency across time and diverse observers suggests something beyond shared delusion or cultural conditioning. Contemporary accounts from recent visitors describe experiences that mirror historical reports with unsettling accuracy. Urban explorers who venture into the abandoned sections of Victoria Boys during off-season report hearing school bells ring at precise intervals, the sound of children reciting lessons in footsteps, and seem to patrol corridors as if maintaining eternal watch over empty classrooms. Photography enthusiasts attempting to capture the school's architecture often find their equipment malfunctioning. In specific locations, cameras that work perfectly elsewhere suddenly drain batteries, produce distorted images, or capture footage of rooms that appear occupied despite being visibly empty. Some report that their photographs, when developed, show additional figures that weren't present during shooting. The psychological impact on those who experience supernatural phenomena at Dow Hill extends far beyond momentary fear. Students who attended the schools during active years often report persistent dreams about their time there, recurring nightmares involving classroom encounters with inhuman teachers, and a lingering sense that their education included lessons never intended for living minds. Former teachers describe feeling constantly observed during their tenure, as if invisible administrators were evaluating their performance according to standards from bygone eras. Many left their positions earlier than planned, citing not specific frightening incidents, but rather a gradual erosion of comfort and belonging, as if the schools were slowly rejecting their presence. The broader Kurseong community has developed complex relationships with the supernatural reputation of Dow Hill. While tourism benefits from visitors drawn by ghost stories, locals must navigate daily life in a place where paranormal encounters are treated as normal rather than exceptional. Children grow up learning which paths to avoid after dark, which buildings to approach with caution, and which sounds to ignore even when they seem to call your name. Local spiritual leaders from various traditions, Hindu priests, Buddhist monks, and tribal shamans have attempted to address the supernatural activity through different ceremonial approaches. Their efforts sometimes provide temporary relief, but the phenomena inevitably return, suggesting either that the spiritual disturbances are too deeply rooted to eliminate, or that the location itself has become a focal point for paranormal energy that transcends any single religious framework. The schools themselves have adapted to their supernatural reputations in various ways. Administrative policies now include protocols for handling reports of paranormal encounters, counseling resources for students affected by supernatural experiences, and unofficial guidelines for staff about how to respond when the unexplained interrupts normal educational activities. What makes locations like Dow Hill supernatural hotspots? Is it the combination of historical tragedy, cultural disruption, and concentrated human emotion that creates conditions where paranormal phenomena can manifest? Could the isolation, elevation, and atmospheric conditions of the Darjeeling Hills somehow amplify or preserve psychic energy in ways that urban environments cannot? The persistence of supernatural reports across more than a century suggests that Dow Hill represents something beyond simple ghost stories or cultural mythology. Whether the phenomena are genuinely paranormal or represent complex psychological and environmental factors, the location has become a place where the boundaries between past and present, living and dead, rational and inexplicable, blur in ways that challenge conventional understanding. Perhaps most intriguingly, the educational context of the hauntings raises questions about the relationship between knowledge, memory, and supernatural persistence. Are these phantom students and teachers somehow trapped in eternal lessons? Or do places of learning somehow record and replay human experiences with unusual intensity? What draws the dead to schools where the living once gathered to learn? Could the concentrated energy of young minds and dedicated teachers create psychic impressions that outlast physical death? Or do these colonial institutions represent unresolved historical trauma that manifests through supernatural means? Share your thoughts on India's most haunted educational institutions. But approach the mystery with respect for those who've experienced genuine terror in pursuit of knowledge. If this exploration of Dow Hill's supernatural legacy kept you engaged like this video, subscribe to Silent Conspiracy, and ring the bell for more investigations into places where learning becomes something far more dangerous than education. Next time we LAL, visit another location where the past refuses to remain buried, where history's darkest chapters continue to write themselves in blood and shadow. Till then, stay curious about the unknown. But remember that some lessons are taught by teachers who should have stopped instructing long ago. And some schools never truly close. They just change their enrollment requirements.